Welcome to Petrichor on the Rocks. I'm Mason. Human beings have three eyes. One that sees what we know, one that sees what we don't know, and one that sees ourselves internally. This is the fullness of human experience, and all of the world can be boiled down to these three methods of observing the world we find ourselves in. These are the three spheres of human perception. When reading a text or consuming any form of media, it's important to know which of these three you are consuming the text with. You can only use one at a time, and if you don't know which one you're using, then it means that you're defaulting to the one you feel most comfortable with. The three spheres are as follows. The high sphere is the unknown, the low sphere is the known, and the middle sphere is the personally relevant. The high sphere is one and the same as the child mind. This method of approaching the text is to do so without preconceptions, presumptions, or self-awareness. It is pure openness. If you've ever sat in a movie theater and been totally engrossed in the film, and then suddenly blinked back to awareness as the credits rolled with no idea where the time went, you have experienced the child mind. Other names for the high sphere are the expanse above, the first light, the open horizon, the first breath, the pure stream, the blank canvas, the uncharted map, and the untamed wilderness. The low sphere is one and the same as the anchored earth. This method of approaching the text is to do so with presumptions and already established axioms, a set of facts which are considered true and against which all things you see in the text are judged. If you've ever said, "I can do that," then your confidence comes from the fact that you feel you have something to stand on. Everything here fits within your knowledge set, and thus it is below you and submits to you as you use it for your reasoning. Other names for the low sphere are the approved map, the roots of the tree, the canon lore, the archive of the mind, the framed image, the climbed mountain, the marked trail, and the favored hearth. The mid-sphere is one and the same as the mirror. It is the conscious experience of what it's like to be you. It's from this egocentric point that all things are given value in relation to how they matter to you. This is the realm of emotional connection. If you ever read a book and it seemed dreadfully boring, such as a math textbook, then it's because you can't find yourself in it. It's not personally relevant to you, and thus doesn't connect to anything you feel. The math textbook, when looked at in the mirror that is your internal state, doesn't reflect anything back. This is where the other two spheres get their value. If you watch a movie and are engrossed, then it's because you keep seeing yourself in it, seeing how you are, how you want to be, or how you are scared you might become, each relevant to you personally. And when you are considering your knowledge set, you can only do so if that knowledge is relevant to you. There's no point in reasoning about if you're strong enough to kick down a door if you know you can just open the door instead and walk through. Thus, the entire line of reasoning about how strong you are, how strong the door is, and how much effort it would take are irrelevant to you, so they are discarded, not because they are unreasonable, but because they can't be reasoned without a reason to do so. Other names for the midsphere are the burning lantern, the echo of the soul, the inward eye, the blinding threads, the divine spark, the whispering flame, the focusing lens, and the glint in the darkness. These mindsets will all come naturally given time, but only ever one at a time, even if you don't notice you're using one. But that's also the danger. If you don't observe which sphere you're in, then you're always just going to default to the sphere you like most. The longer you spend in each sphere, the more comfortable you will become there, and the harder it will become for you to escape it and switch to another sphere. The temptation of the high sphere is surrender. By relaxing and submitting to the world, you allow it to reveal to you anything and everything it wishes to show you. If you try to stop and put what you've seen into a box, then you've slipped into the low sphere. The moment you say, "I get it," then you have stopped looking and instead solidified your understanding into something that no longer moves. The openness and surrender is the state of awe in which a person is struck by a mix of fear and wonder. Fear because you are no longer in control, now confronted by something which is larger than yourself and knows more than you do, which inherently humbles you. But wonder because when you are humbled into surrender, it is undeniable that there is something you could learn there. Nothing which isn't above you can humble you. But the danger in the high sphere is that if you get comfortable in the state of surrender, it can cause you to overindulge, creating a Peter Pan disorder in which you never want to grow up and solidify anything into knowledge, because once you gain understanding, you're then burdened with the task of figuring out how to turn what you know into actual function in the world around you. That means work. There's also a temptation to consider yourself to be in connection with something higher and transcendent, which leads to prideful narcissism. After all, surrender to the higher things has opened you up to even higher understandings about the world, and so there's a pitfall to think that that's how the whole world should work, that the application of higher understanding should manifest itself as easy as the surrender of learning it did. But this leaves you ungrounded and out of touch with the more mundane and boring day-to-day aspects of reality. Once the dice are rolled, the numbers they will land on are known, but they instantly become boring, and rather than recording the numbers, the lover of the high sphere will endlessly re-roll the dice just to see what will happen next. Gamblers, daydreamers, those who love video games and books too much, those who are spiritual but not religious, the perpetual student who takes useless college courses and collects degrees they will never use, and the Eastern schools of thought that love detachment above all else all reside here. This escapism, where you become so engrossed in the novelty of the unknown, imaginative, and wondrous that real-world responsibilities fall by the wayside and destroy actual living. The most well-known example of this in fiction would be elves. In touch with higher things, such as nature and spirituality, they have vast, long lives, but often they are pompous and prideful, out of touch with the world and usually reluctant to act. Because of this, they're always dying out as they leave the earthly things, even procreation, unattended. The low sphere gets its temptation from its nature as a place of control, and from the feeling of being in control can come comfort. Once you have a knowledge set and you have applied it into real, tangible function in the world, then that is the very definition of power. Given that something has been established to actually work, it becomes hard to let go of. All new knowledge and information must be taken and forced to fit in the already established knowledge set, or discarded entirely if it's found to be incompatible. This rigidity creates strength so long as the methods work, but if the situation of the world shifts, then suddenly the same functional methods no longer do what they're supposed to do. They must be discarded, but if they are too beloved, then they are clung to and defended even as they die. The danger of the low sphere is stagnation, a disconnect from revivifying waters above which bring new life and reestablish the works in reality. Dogmatism and tradition are held as sacred here, and any suggestion of altering them brings about a defensive anger that hides the fear of change. This can lead to obsessive-compulsive disorders, anxiety over fears of the system failing, and depression once a system has been undeniably proven to have failed, lending to an all-or-nothing mentality where you are either right, in charge, and making things happen, or you are nothing, worthless, and there's no hope. The same is true for any source of outside information you might trust. Either they have a stamp of approval and their words are law, such as the scientific community where you need either the right degree to be called an expert or you need a cited peer-reviewed study, or else you're nothing and can't speak on the subject at all. Once the system is in place, moving it is a waste of time and a threat to the system. Those who love the low sphere are those who drive the speed limit even on their way to the hospital, those who endlessly argue if Goku could beat Superman, those who will demand a tomato is a fruit and that dolphins aren't fish, the perfectionists, the traditionalists, the workaholics, the academics, the dogmatists, those who say to follow the science, and the Gnostic atheists. The most well-known example of this in fiction would be the dwarves. They are hard-working, diligent, and unwavering in terms of working with solid tools and materials. They are so grounded in reality as to be literally underground, but often they are blinded by their own certainty and trust in tradition. They can't see the light from above and instead are guided by their own little lights that they made for themselves. Their fixations are simple and immediate: food, drink, fighting, building, and gaining ever more riches out of the material world around them as they mine and dig. But the higher considerations of reality are far from their minds. Not even worshiping gods, they worship their ancestors, for the only thing that can be trusted is tradition, given to them by those who came before and proved it. But their downfall comes from this love of the material world. It is often greed that causes them to dig too deep and too greedily until they find something down there in the bowels of the earth which was unexpected. And if there is one thing that shatters well-established tradition and knowledge, it's the unforeseen catastrophe of the unknown. The mid-sphere gets its temptation from the desire you feel to make everything about you. Being the center of your own perceptual world, there is an inherent pull to only ever consider something as it relates to you personally. If it brings you value or pleasure, then it can stay. But if it's only a source of displeasure, then it must be discarded. In doing so, any truth that might exist within something unpleasant is rejected before it's explored, and thus truth is lost, sacrificed for the sake of one's own pleasure. In this way, those who love the mid-sphere love to make deals with the world. Anything they can't get simply needs to be finessed in order to get as much as possible. Those who love this sphere include the activists who want to save the world, not for the sake of the world, but because they want to be a savior. The chronic complainers who will not tolerate anything that ruins their good time and demand that the world change accordingly. Those with main character syndrome who can't see the world except for how it relates to their goals and desires. The emotional manipulators and people pleasers who will say anything needed, be it friendly or harsh, if it gets other people to fall in line with their plans. The overthinkers who don't want to act until they have everything figured out in their head first and thus never act at all. And the overly sensitive souls who take everything personally because everything was about them to begin with. If a group laughs in the distance, then the sensitive soul checks themselves to figure out why that group was laughing at them, because of course it was all about them the whole time. This can lead to a dehumanizing of other people, as someone who loves the mid-sphere may not see them as people, but rather as a source of self-gratification, though some level of dehumanization is required to function in the world. After all, you can never get around to your meal if you spend the entire evening treating your waiter not like someone who is going to serve you and bring you food, but rather as a good friend who you wanted to spend some time talking with personally. The mid-sphere is also the place from which creativity arises. All creative art is, to some degree or another, an attempt by the artist to express to other people the way they see the world. In effect, turning all creative works into a declaration of, see how the world is through my eyes. A beloved woman might be shown as surrounded by flowers, a corrupt politician might be depicted with the tail of a rat, all of these attempts by the artist to get you to see through his eyes instead of your own. Should an artist fail to express themselves and be seen, it can create isolation and thus spurn ever greater needs to be seen and heard, leading to the great works of art throughout history, which most often come from tormented and outcast souls. The mid-sphere is the domain of the jack-of-all-trades, because here everything relates to you personally. Anything you find, you judge, not for its own worth, but for how it can be added to you and your goals. If it comes from above, then it should be a message just for you personally. If it comes from below, then it should be a function that was made for you to get use out of it. The most well-known example in fiction is the human being as they exist stuck between elves and dwarves. What could be more personal than we ourselves self-inserted into a story right in the middle of it all? Humans are portrayed as good at everything but not experts in anything, adaptable and serving as the mediators that bring dwarves, elves, and other races together. The human strength is that they do everything because everything is human-centered. They can use magic as the elves do and technology as the dwarves do. They innovate because they can take the short-term material functionality of the dwarves and the long-term natural purpose of the elves and combine them into the balance perfectly suited to human needs. This is because humans don't really care about either the short-term or the long-term, the material or the spiritual. They care about their own internal goals, and everything else is just a means to an end. So which of the three spheres is good or bad? Well, they're all good and they're all bad. Bad when you get stuck in any one of them as the main way to view the world, which means you've gotten too fond of one sphere, and good when you cycle through all the spheres over time. The progress always goes in order. High into mid, into low, and back into high again. Your starting point on the path through the spheres depends on how you encountered the thing you're breaking down. If you are suddenly confronted with an unexpected sight that invokes a strong emotion, then you've started in the mid-sphere. The next step is the low sphere, where you try to parse what you saw and how it mechanically happened. And finally, you enter the high sphere, where you try to understand why this had to happen at all. For example, you might learn that your best friend passed away, the news hitting you right in the gut. Thus, it has a great deal of mid-sphere value to you personally. Then you ask how it happened, looking for mechanical details as to what ended his life, hoping to gain some control of the situation by using your low-sphere knowledge of the world to fix things. And finally, you would ask the big questions, such as, why would God do this, looking up into the unknown high sphere and hoping to find something you didn't know that might help the situation. So how do you use the three spheres to read a book properly? The method is simple. It's called a three-sphere breakdown, in which you take the text and read it 3 times, each time reading as though the text were written and existed only in that single sphere. For the high sphere, you try to maintain the child mind. You read without presumptions and pretend like you have no context for what you're reading. You let the text tell you exactly what it wants to, whatever that happens to be. You question nothing. You follow the rules of the story as they are revealed to you. You assume there is a hidden meaning you don't yet understand behind everything presented, and you willingly follow all observed patterns, symbols, and connections you notice further along as far as they will take you. And in doing so, you begin to notice the patterns which are contained within the book itself. This brings you into the world of the book. All reality you knew before should be gone in this moment, and you let yourself become fully engrossed in the new world. By doing so, you begin to see through eyes not just your own, and for that short time, you become someone else entirely. From this new state of being, you can access things that the real you back in the real world would never be able to. When you finally return, you'll have a new set of observed patterns which might just have great value in the real world. For the mid-sphere, you read the text as though it were written for you specifically. You use it as a mirror, expecting to see yourself in the text. Either that it's about you, it's a reaction to you, or that it's meant to outline something about your personal situation in life. By doing this, you will often find that mundane objects or interactions are symbolic representations of something else entirely. After all, if a described object isn't obviously relevant to you, then it can be assumed that it symbolizes something that is relevant, but which is too complicated to fit within the text in any form but in a compressed symbol. For example, how in Lord of the Rings everyone is very fixated on a magical ring, but because you're not fixated on jewelry and magic isn't real, then in order to engage with the text you must assume that the ring represents something you don't know about, such as the temptation to think in your own mind that if everyone would just listen to your solution, then the whole world would be fixed. For the low sphere, you read a text simply for what it says, observing how things mechanically work in the story, establishing hierarchies between entities, working to determine which characters are the strongest, which are the smartest, and what the powers and abilities of each character is. Structuring a mental understanding of the relationships, what their motivations are, and how much of the story you can predict as you go along, all in service of increasing your knowledge base about the fantasy world as it relates to your knowledge in the real world, which can cause you to become rather upset if what you are reading is supposed to be a historically accurate drama, but then a man pulls out a laser gun and vaporizes his opponent. The value of intentionally focusing on which of the three spheres you read through a text with is that it can be used to determine where your blindness lies and what you can't currently see in a given work. There are also failure conditions for engaging with a text in each of the three spheres. For the high sphere, you fail when you chalk up something you're seeing in the story to either nonsense or as irrelevant. By declaring something nonsense, you're judging that it doesn't fit into your knowledge set and thus dismissing it out of your consideration. This means you've slipped into the low sphere and judged it by what you know. Anything still hidden within that aspect of the text is now lost to you. By declaring it irrelevant, you are judging that it doesn't have a value to you, even if there is something hidden there. By doing so, you've slipped into the mid-sphere and judged that aspect of the text by its value to you, which is really just a guess at the value until the actual value is uncovered, which also means you have cut yourself off from learning the truth of that value. For the mid-sphere, you fail when you say everything in the text is either subjective or objective. By assuming that the contents of the text was made for someone else, and because you lack their subjective perspective, there's no hope that you can possibly understand it. Then you have entered the high sphere and assume that the text is simply inaccessible to you. It probably has meaning to someone somewhere, but you aren't them, and so there's no reason to give it much effort. Thus, you have cut yourself off from the text before you have even tried. However, if you declare the text to be objectively known, then it means the text can't be for you because you've already consolidated all the text had into facts. There's no reason to revisit established facts again, and so you think you already know it all. Something you already know can't be offered to you because it's worthless now, so you stop considering that the text has any new meaning. You have placed the text into the low sphere, and thus it's beneath you and behind you. But if you're wrong because the text changed, or you are mistaken in what you think you know, then you have blinded yourself to that which remained unseen. For the low sphere, you fail when you lose confidence and allow in doubt about the text. As you observe things, you can allow in the doubt of your senses. If you stop trusting reality as you observe it, then you have disconnected yourself from the ability to hold facts. You certainly can't read a book if you don't trust in your ability to even read. Losing confidence in this way means you have slipped up into the internal state of the mid-sphere where everything is in question that isn't firmly seen in your own head. You still trust pleasure and pain and your sense of self, but nothing outside of your own perception of your mind can be trusted. This is often just called solipsism. And if you take that farther and doubt so much that you can't even impose assurance that you yourself exist and are really feeling things, then you've slipped even higher into the high sphere, where you lose all ability to protect your sense of self and become a being who only feels and experiences, but doesn't impose even preferences onto what is perceived. You certainly can't read a book if you question if that book is just an illusion and doesn't really exist, much less if you don't even impose your own desire to read. This is the state often desired by those who meditate, trying to let go of all desires and completely remove the ego. Some important things to note: the sphere which you are most naturally drawn to is the one which you have the most trouble keeping yourself from falling into. This can show you your own personal bias as to which sphere you like most. Conversely, the sphere which you struggle to maintain focus on is the one which you are least naturally inclined towards and is likely to be the one out of which you get the most value. It's also noteworthy that the longer a text has been around, the longer it means people have found mid-sphere personal relevance within it, which means that they have repeatedly witnessed that there was something going on in that text up in the high sphere which is useful and important to them. Thus, populations kept the text around and relevant in order to keep cycling through the three spheres over and over, extracting something new from each cycle, thus passing it on to subsequent generations and serving as the most basic form of proof that the text contains something true. After all, if many people keep cycling through a text and keep finding it useful in at least one of the three spheres, then it proves that the text indeed contains some form of truth somewhere inside. And lastly, the three-sphere breakdown method doesn't just work for text, but for everything in one's entire life. All things can be seen for their value by using the three spheres as the foundation for understanding them. This is because you already do it anytime you observe anything. When you see a sign with letters and symbols, you jump right to the mid-sphere, assuming that sign was made with you in mind, and that you should read that it says "danger, sharks" before you go swimming, because that might matter to you. When you see a snake and don't know if it's poisonous or not, you rush to the low sphere authorities you trust and Google the answer. Soon they'll tell you that it's venomous, not poisonous. When you stand beside the ocean and feel small, you're using the high sphere, so of course you feel connected to something larger than yourself, and you surrender to that feeling of awe. You can even use the three spheres in interactions you have with other people. Consider this quote by William James, which goes, "Whenever two people meet, there are really 6 people present. There is each man as he sees himself, each man as the other person sees him, and each man as he really is." Ponder on that for a while. The reason I made this video in the first place is to serve as a reference to send people to in my future work when they inevitably ask, "How do you know?" as we walk through and break down various texts into their respective spheres. And so, this video follows the method and allows you to follow along if you want. So please stay tuned for more videos and leave any questions or additions you have in the comments below. And as always, God bless.